What are you doing in this neighborhood?
Officer, I'm a U.S. Marshal. My credentials are in my jacket. May I reach for them?
Step out of the vehicle now.
Sir, I'm a federal agent.
Hands on the trunk. Moving.
You need to end this stop right now.
Leonard Shaw had been a cop for 8 years with 12 complaints against him when he made the career-ending mistake of his life one Tuesday in Columbus, Ohio. He noticed a black sedan with temp plates rolling through a peaceful residential area, and something triggered in his brain. The person driving wasn't breaking the speed limit. There were no violations taking place, but Shaw chose to tail the vehicle regardless. After 6 blocks of following, he manufactured his justification and hit his emergency lights. Behind that wheel sat Garry Williams, a U.S. Marshal with 15 years of decorated federal service. The events that followed would wreck Shaw's career, launch federal probes, and reveal a troubling pattern that should have been addressed long before. Quick question before we go on. Where are you tuning in from? First time here? Go ahead and smash that subscribe button. These stories deserve attention, and when you support us, we can keep shining light on the truth. Shaw's record should have sent up red flags all across the department. 12 civilian complaints across 8 years, the majority connected to traffic stops, the majority involving black motorists. His bosses had spotted a few concerns but never followed through with real consequences. Some extra training sessions, maybe a talking to, nothing that actually modified how he operated. That leadership vacuum was about to become everyone's problem. The clock read 2:47 p.m. when Shaw caught sight of the black sedan. It moved right at the posted limit through a middle-income neighborhood. The vehicle's operation was completely lawful in every way, yet Shaw slid in behind it and began his pursuit. He was hunting for justification, any excuse at all, for what he'd already made up his mind to do. 6 full blocks he shadowed that sedan, observing and waiting. The moment the vehicle took a right, and the tire grazed the white line for just a second, Shaw found what he needed, lights flashing. Stop initiated. A series of events nobody could undo had begun. Garry spotted those flashing lights and experienced that all-too-familiar sinking sensation. His years in law enforcement taught him to recognize when a stop didn't feel right. Still, he followed the exact protocol he'd recommend to anyone. He brought his vehicle to a safe stop, shifted into park, killed the engine, and positioned both hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. Shaw walked up to the vehicle with his hand already hovering near his sidearm. His body camera captured every moment, though he appeared to have entirely forgotten it was running. That recording would eventually become the smoking gun that destroyed him. Garry lowered his window slowly, keeping his hands in plain sight, staying calm and cooperative. He anticipated the usual request for license and paperwork. Instead, what came next revealed exactly why this stop was happening. Shaw's opening question wasn't about any lane violation. It wasn't asking for documentation. He demanded an explanation for what Garry was doing in that particular neighborhood. The question lingered there like an indictment. The suggestion was absolutely transparent and completely revolting. Garry had navigated tough situations his entire career. He'd taken down dangerous fugitives and managed life-or-death confrontations. But finding himself targeted in this type of stop felt completely different. He maintained his composure and informed the officer he was a federal agent. His identification was inside his jacket pocket. He requested permission to retrieve it. Shaw said no. Rather than letting Garry establish his identity, Shaw commanded him to exit the vehicle without delay. This marked Shaw's second catastrophic error, and the fallout was already stacking up. Federal agents, U.S. Marshals especially, have particular legal safeguards during traffic encounters. They're entitled to identify themselves safely. Officers receive training on these procedures. Shaw either never absorbed them correctly or deliberately disregarded them entirely. Garry exited the vehicle, moving deliberately and maintaining visible hands. He kept his tone steady and courteous, while restating that he was a federal agent who needed to access his credentials for verification. Shaw's response was escalating aggression, louder voice, and positioning his hand even closer to his weapon. A woman living across the street heard voices rising and peered out her window. What she witnessed troubled her right away. The officer's posture read aggressive and confrontational. The motorist was behaving cooperatively and maintaining calm. The entire scene felt completely wrong to her. She retrieved her phone and began filming. That choice to document everything would turn out to be absolutely vital. Her footage caught perspectives and details the body camera missed. It demonstrated the full picture of what was unfolding and just how needless Shaw's hostility truly was. Shaw inquired about weapons in the vehicle. Garry responded honestly that yes, firearms were present because he served as a U.S. Marshal conducting official business. This information should have pushed Shaw to verify Garry's claims right then. Instead, it appeared to intensify Shaw's paranoia and belligerence. Rather than contacting dispatch for identity confirmation, rather than simply permitting him to display his credentials, Shaw escalated further. He directed Garry to the rear of the vehicle and instructed him to position his hands flat on the trunk. Garry followed each directive, while persistently explaining in a calm voice who he was and the exact location of his identification. Additional neighbors picked up on the disturbance. Windows swung open. People emerged onto their front porches. 3 more cell phones appeared to record. Shaw was manufacturing a public scene, and every single second was being captured from numerous vantages. Type badge down in the comments if you believe Shaw should have simply allowed Garry to produce his credentials. Shaw eventually radioed for backup, but the details he transmitted to dispatch were completely fabricated. He described a suspicious person claiming federal agent status who was being uncooperative. Anyone reviewing the body camera audio could clearly hear this was fiction. Garry had shown complete cooperation from the opening second. 2 more officers showed up within minutes. Glenn Foster and Rachel Nuwan arrived with no understanding of what kind of mess they were stepping into. Shaw immediately offered them his spin on events, characterizing Garry as uncooperative and potentially threatening. But examining the actual scene, something wasn't computing. Nuwan had sufficient experience to immediately identify problems. She posed the obvious question to Shaw. Had he permitted the man to present identification? Shaw waved off the question, claiming the suspect was being evasive. That response didn't remotely satisfy Nuwan. Garry looked straight at Nuwan and declared his complete name, badge number, and department assignment. He informed her precisely where his credentials sat and requested permission to get them. His delivery was professional and exact. This was unmistakably someone with law enforcement background. Nuwan shot Foster a glance. The look they traded communicated everything. They both understood this stop had gone horribly sideways. Nuwan pulled Shaw to the side and quietly recommended they permit the man to display his identification immediately. Shaw declined, maintaining he held authority and they needed to follow his direction. This generated an obvious division among the responding officers. Nuwan wanted zero involvement in what was transparently becoming a catastrophe. Foster was less experienced and more uncertain, though even he could detect warning signs everywhere. Without careful handling, this would annihilate all their careers. Garry stayed patient throughout all this, though his frustration must have been tremendous. Here stood a federal law enforcement officer, getting treated like a criminal for absolutely zero legitimate cause. His sole apparent violation was driving while black in an area where Shaw believed he had no business being. Shaw reached his next disastrous decision. He declared his intention to search the vehicle. Garry immediately notified him that, without probable cause or permission, such a search violated the law. He clearly stated he refused consent for any vehicle search. Shaw disregarded him and proceeded with the search anyway. This wasn't merely a violation of Garry's constitutional rights. Federal agents' vehicles frequently hold sensitive case documents, evidence, and materials connected to active investigations. Searching one without appropriate authorization potentially constitutes a federal offense. Shaw had just stepped over a boundary that would trigger serious repercussions. He located Garry's badge and credentials inside the jacket on the passenger seat, precisely where Garry had indicated them numerous times. Shaw extracted them and stared. For an extended moment, he simply stood frozen as the magnitude of his actions began registering. He'd illegally detained a U.S. Marshal. He'd executed an unlawful search. He'd transmitted a false report to dispatch, and every bit of it lived on multiple cameras. His career had flatlined, and somewhere in Shaw's consciousness, he had to grasp that reality. But rather than immediately offering an apology and attempting damage control, Shaw compounded his problems. He scrutinized the credentials as though they might be counterfeit. He questioned Garry about why he hadn't displayed them right away, despite his own body camera establishing he never provided Garry that opportunity. Every utterance from his mouth just excavated the hole deeper. Nuon had witnessed enough. She approached, examined the credentials herself, and informed Shaw this had to conclude immediately. She got on her radio and requested dispatch to independently verify the badge number. Inside 30 seconds, dispatch confirmed Garry Williams as an active U.S. Marshal in excellent standing. The gathering of neighbors had expanded to roughly a dozen individuals. Many were filming. Everyone was observing an officer's career disintegrate in real time. What they witnessed wasn't simply one corrupt cop experiencing one bad day. They were seeing the outcome of a system that permitted officers like Shaw to function with impunity for years until they ultimately crossed the line too far. Do body cameras actually make a difference? Drop your perspective below. Shaw returned the credentials without extending any apology or clarification. He informed Garry he was cleared to leave, as though this represented just a routine traffic stop reaching its natural ending. Zero acknowledgement of what had transpired, zero recognition of the violations that had occurred, just a frigid dismissal. But Garry didn't climb back into his vehicle and drive off. He requested Shaw's name and badge number. Shaw paused. Officers face legal requirements to supply this information upon request, yet Shaw obviously preferred not to. That hesitation alone revealed he grasped how catastrophically he'd messed up. Garry documented everything: names, badge numbers, timestamp, location, the entire sequence of events. He captured photos of the scene using his phone. He was constructing a case, and Shaw could only stand there watching it develop. Following Garry's eventual departure, Nuon confronted Shaw head-on. She demanded to know his rationale for pulling that man over initially. Shaw insisted it was the improper lane change, though even that justification was questionable at absolute best. She pressed him on refusing to allow identification. Shaw possessed no adequate response for that. Foster appeared visibly rattled. He grasped how narrowly he'd avoided having his own career demolished simply through association with this stop. Had he mindlessly followed Shaw's direction, instead of allowing Nuon to assume control, he might have been confronting identical consequences Shaw was about to encounter. The videos exploded across the internet within hours. The neighbor who initiated recording uploaded her footage to social platforms with a comprehensive explanation of what she'd observed. By midnight, hundreds of thousands had viewed it. By sunrise, millions. Local news grabbed the story instantly. By that afternoon, it had become national news. A decorated U.S. Marshal illegally detained and searched in a racially motivated traffic encounter. The optics couldn't have looked worse for the Columbus Police Department. The department's Public Affairs Division entered crisis response. They issued a standard statement about awareness of the incident and launching an investigation. The public wasn't accepting that response. Demonstrators started assembling outside police headquarters demanding Shaw's immediate termination. The U.S. Marshal Service issued their own declaration confirming Deputy Marshal Garry Williams had been illegally detained during an unjustified traffic encounter. They announced filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. That transformed everything. Federal participation meant this transcended just a local police issue. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division launched an investigation targeting Shaw specifically and the Columbus Police Department's wider patterns. They wanted answers about how an officer carrying 12 complaints remained on active duty. Shaw landed on administrative leave inside 24 hours. The police union initially attempted defending him with a statement regarding officers making challenging split-second judgments. The backlash arrived immediately and intensely. The union rapidly retreated from that stance. The body camera recording was released following a Freedom of Information filing. Viewing it proved devastating. From the opening moment of contact, Shaw's prejudice was transparent. His aggression came unprovoked. His refusal permitting Garry to establish identity was utterly indefensible. The illegal search was documented in flawless detail. Everything destroying his career existed right there in high definition. Legal professionals reviewing the footage reached unanimous conclusions. Shaw had violated civil rights, executed an illegal search, and submitted false reports. Any individual violation could terminate a police career. All three combined meant Shaw was absolutely finished. The internal investigation proceeded with remarkable speed, probably driven by fierce public pressure and federal scrutiny. Investigators questioned everyone present, analyzed all accessible footage, and scrutinized Shaw's complete employment record. What they uncovered painted a deeply troubling picture. Those 12 prior complaints demonstrated an undeniable pattern. 10 involved traffic encounters with black motorists. Most happened in predominantly white areas. The complaints depicted strikingly comparable conduct in every instance: aggressive approach, inquiries about why the individual was present in the area, searches lacking clear justification. The department had identified some incidents requiring extra training. Shaw had received counseling multiple times, but he never experienced genuine discipline. Supervisors failed recognizing or confronting the blatant behavioral pattern. That failure enabled Shaw to persist until he ultimately targeted someone who couldn't be bullied into silence. 3 weeks following the incident, the Columbus Police Department announced Shaw's firing. The official declaration cited numerous policy violations, including illegal detention, unlawful search, submitting false reports, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The termination took effect immediately with zero possibility of reinstatement. But Shaw's troubles weren't finished. The local prosecutor's office declared they were examining the case for potential criminal prosecution. Violating civil rights under color of authority constitutes a federal crime. The illegal search could also generate criminal penalties. Shaw's union couldn't shield him from federal prosecution. Actually, they quietly abandoned defending him once criminal charges appeared probable. He stood alone now, confronting the prospect of prison time for actions he committed while wearing a badge. The Department of Justice broadened their investigation into a comprehensive pattern and practice examination of the entire Columbus Police Department. They assessed training protocols, complaint mechanisms, supervisory monitoring, and disciplinary processes. How many additional officers like Shaw existed out there functioning without accountability? The city confronted the potential of federal oversight via a consent decree, which would position the department under court supervision for years. The financial burden would prove enormous. The operational transformations would be massive, all stemming from one officer's bigotry and the system's failure stopping him. Have you or anyone you know faced something comparable? The comments section is a safe space for sharing. Garry participated in one interview with a national news organization. He remained measured and professional, precisely what you'd anticipate from someone in his role. He clarified that he didn't want becoming the face of this narrative, but felt duty-bound to speak publicly. If this could happen to a federal agent, what happened to regular citizens lacking his resources or visibility? He discussed the fear he experienced during that stop, even as a trained law enforcement officer himself. The uncertainty of not knowing how extreme Shaw would escalate matters. The disturbing realization that his badge and years of service carried zero weight with an officer who'd already determined he represented a threat based exclusively on his skin color. The interview resonated because Garry didn't stage outrage or demand vengeance. He simply recounted what occurred and its significance. He advocated for improved training, substantive oversight, and genuine consequences for officers abusing their authority. His composed professionalism amplified the message even more powerfully. Civil rights groups utilized the case as a textbook illustration of why police reform was desperately required. Here stood a decorated federal agent, handled like a criminal. If someone possessing that degree of authority and training could be victimized, then nobody enjoyed true protection from prejudiced policing. The case also spotlighted the critical value of documenting police encounters. Without the body camera recording and civilian footage, it would have been Shaw's narrative against Garry's. The recordings rendered the truth undeniable and justice achievable. 6 months past the incident, federal charges were brought against Shaw. 3 counts: deprivation of rights under color of authority, illegal search and seizure, and providing false statements to investigators. Each count presented potential imprisonment. His trial received scheduling for the subsequent year. The Columbus Police Department instituted sweeping transformations responding to the federal investigation, new training initiatives on implicit bias and constitutional policing, reformed complaint systems with independent civilian monitoring, early warning mechanisms designed for identifying troubling patterns before escalation, monthly examinations of random body camera recordings searching for concerning officer conduct. Were these modifications adequate? Only the future would reveal. Reform isn't a singular event, but an ongoing commitment. The genuine test would be whether the department's culture genuinely transformed, or if they were simply performing motions to appease federal investigators. Garry resumed his standard duties with the U.S. Marshal Service. He didn't pursue continued media spotlight or attempt becoming a public activist. He had responsibilities to fulfill protecting citizens and capturing fugitives, and he continued executing them excellently. But his case generated impact extending far beyond his personal experience. Police departments nationwide started incorporating the incident in training initiatives. It became a case study demonstrating what not to do during traffic encounters. It illustrated how rapidly an officer's unchecked prejudice could transform a routine interaction into a career-destroying catastrophe with criminal ramifications. Some officers grumbled that cases like this complicated their jobs, that they'd face second-guessing for every choice. But most professional law enforcement officers grasped the genuine lesson. Treat everyone with respect and dignity, follow constitutional parameters, and your career will be perfectly fine. It wasn't complex. The neighbor who initially documented the incident participated in several interviews explaining why she started filming. She stated the interaction's tone immediately appeared wrong to her. The officer's aggression level didn't correspond to the situation she was witnessing. Her instinct instructed her to document what was unfolding, and that choice helped guarantee accountability became possible. Her actions generated important conversations regarding citizen oversight and bystander roles during police encounters. Recording police activity is lawful in virtually every circumstance, and witness videos frequently supply crucial evidence that official body cameras might overlook or departments might hesitate releasing. Shaw's trial occurred 14 months following the initial traffic stop. The evidence against him proved overwhelming and arrived from multiple sources: body camera recording, witness footage, testimony from Nguyen and Foster, dispatch recordings, and Garry's own comprehensive account. Everything told an identical story. The defense tried arguing. Shaw made judgment errors, but didn't operate with criminal intent. That argument crumbled when prosecutors introduced the pattern from his previous complaints. This clearly wasn't a singular mistake, but a behavioral pattern that had ultimately escalated too far and been properly documented. The jury deliberated under 4 hours. Guilty across all 3 counts. Shaw displayed zero emotion as the verdict was announced, but his family members present in the courtroom were shattered. The man who'd invested 8 years as a police officer would now become a convicted felon. Sentencing arrived 2 months later. The judge recognized Shaw's years of public service but stressed that his betrayal of the oath he'd sworn was too grave to dismiss. 18 months in federal prison. 3 years of monitored release following that, and a lifetime ban from working in any law enforcement role anywhere nationwide. For someone who'd constructed his entire identity around being a cop, this signified the total obliteration of his life as he understood it. His pension vanished, his career ended, his reputation destroyed permanently, all because he permitted his prejudices to supersede his training, his judgment, and the Constitution he'd pledged to defend. The Columbus Police Department resolved a civil lawsuit with Garry for an undisclosed sum. The settlement incorporated agreements for sustained reform initiatives and continuing federal monitoring of the department. The city's taxpayers would ultimately absorb the expense for one officer's misconduct and the department's years of neglecting to confront his behavioral pattern. 3 supervisors who'd reviewed Shaw's earlier complaints without implementing meaningful action also encountered discipline. 1 received a demotion. 2 were reassigned to non-supervisory roles. The department was signaling clearly that neglecting to address problem officers would generate consequences moving forward. If you've reached this point, you're contributing to the solution. Subscribe and spread this story so others can absorb its lessons. The broader consequences of the case continued developing over subsequent years. Police reform legislation in Ohio incorporated provisions inspired directly by Garry's experience. Fresh requirements for enhanced tracking and examination of complaints. Mandatory early intervention initiatives for officers displaying problematic patterns. Stricter criteria and improved documentation requirements for traffic encounters. Not every police misconduct case concludes with this degree of accountability. Many victims lack the platform or resources a federal agent possesses. Many incidents aren't captured on camera from numerous angles. Many officers never confront genuine consequences for their behavior. That's precisely why this case held significance beyond just one improper traffic stop. It proved accountability was achievable when clear evidence existed, sustained public pressure materialized, and officials demonstrated willingness to act on both. It established that wearing a badge doesn't position anyone beyond the law, and it revealed the system could function appropriately, even if achieving that required a perfect convergence of circumstances. Garry never stated wanting to become a symbol or test case for police reform. He was simply heading home from a work assignment when he got stopped for zero legitimate cause. But his experience transformed into a teaching moment for the entire nation about what policing should resemble and what it absolutely cannot permit. Years of committed service, protecting citizens, pursuing dangerous fugitives, and upholding justice, and he still wasn't protected from being profiled and mistreated by a prejudiced officer. That reality proved uncomfortable for many individuals to acknowledge, but acknowledging it was essential for any genuine change to materialize. The narrative of that traffic stop on a Tuesday afternoon in Columbus evolved into more than just one incident between one corrupt cop and one federal agent. It became proof of a systemic problem and a blueprint for addressing it. Document everything possible, demand accountability consistently, support meaningful reform initiatives, and never accept this is simply how things must be. Officer Leonard Shaw demolished his own career the instant he chose to pull over someone based on assumptions and prejudice instead of actual evidence of lawbreaking. Every choice he made afterward just progressively worsened things. He had numerous opportunities to change direction and opted not to seize any of them. Ultimately, justice prevailed, but the entire situation never should have been necessary initially. Thanks for sticking with us until the conclusion. Make certain you're subscribed for more stories that hold weight. What struck you as the most shocking element of this narrative?